I'm going to sort of run down how we're going to do this panel first, and then I'll give some brief opening remarks, and we're going to go right into it. So what we'll do first is I'm going to just sort of frame our discussion. Then I'm going to have our panelists quickly introduce themselves, and then they each will sort of briefly talk about their take on this idea. And let me also, recognize Sarah Yousafzai and the role she's played in helping to conceptualize this panel and her work in putting together this fantastic conference. But it's called Jobs of the Future, but it should basically be the future of jobs. And the reason for that is one of the disturbing issues that I find that's resonates today is this idea of the jobless future. That to me is unconscionable. And we shouldn't talk about a future without jobs, because what it in essence says is that we're going to decreate the very platforms that have allowed people in the United States to build their lives. So I've heard people in a very cavalier way talk about, oh, we're going to deploy a fleet of driverless trucks, and it doesn't matter that that basically decreates God knows how many jobs. And then someone else will talk from obtuse economic theory to say, well, for every job that is taken out of existence, there'll be a multiple of jobs that will be created in its place. Well, that doesn't create any level of confidence in the general person. And so I wanted to have a panel where we were really going to get into this idea of the jobless future from the standpoint of people and from a humanistic perspective. So I'll just leave that there with my opening remarks. Now I'd just like to ask all of our panelists to introduce themselves briefly, and then we'll get into what will be an iterative discussion. Tom?
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here, and it's a pleasure to be part of this conference. I'm Director of Social Impact and External Affairs, General Assembly. We're a global education and training company that focuses on preparing people to become web developers, user experience designers, digital marketers, and have really created a business model that's really focused on helping folks who are passionate about tech or entrepreneurship and want to break into this space to very quickly get those skills and to get jobs in short order.
Thanks, Tom. Grace?
I'm Charlotte Lysohir.
Thanks, Charlotte.
I am the program manager for P-Tech Brooklyn, which is a school that you might have heard Rashid speak about earlier on the Reimagining Education panel. I'm basically the industry liaison, so I work with P-Tech on the workforce development lens of things, and that's pretty much where I will be addressing this conversation from, but also did speak to one of our really great HR representatives who's working on the New Collar Jobs Initiative, because part of my work is working on a pipeline for our students to apply to jobs at IBM. So I also have some notes from her.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Aiha Nguyen. I am the Labor Engagement Lead at the Future of Work Initiative at the Data and Society Research Institute. And Data Society's mandate is to study the impacts of technology on society. And I think my role here may be to talk about how technology is currently already affecting jobs and changing how work is being done. This includes everything from gig work and platform-based work to automation to what does it mean when machine learning becomes a part of our work environment. And maybe I'll give you a little hope that we might still have jobs in the future.
Me too.
Tom, why don't you start us off and just talk a little bit about the General Assembly point of view and where you make that direct connection, where you take an individual and can help them move directly into some form of gainful employment.
Yeah, thank you. I think what we've seen at GA over the past 2 years, so, we've trained over 11,000 adults to become web developers or UX designers through our immersive training programs and then help them to get jobs. And we really focus on that outcome, right? We have 88% of our students 3 months after completing the program have jobs, 99% within 6 months have a job. And so we're really thinking about how do we develop curriculum and content that really is tightly aligned with what the labor market has asked for. I think something that it was kind of a surprise to me, honestly, coming to GA, was that when I think about tech jobs, my head often goes to Silicon Valley, right? Facebook and Google and other firms that are sort of the big tech titans. And the folks who are coming out of GA's programs and becoming developers and designers are typically getting hired at places like that are, on their face not technology companies, but have now become technology companies. So that's financial services firms, insurance companies, consumer packaged goods, media firms. And I was just sort of looking at the stats. So there were in New York City in the past year, there were 336,000 open positions for web development professionals in the city. And when you look at the top people who are hiring, it's not Facebook and Google. It's JP Morgan Chase, it's Goldman Sachs, it's Verizon. So I think what we're really seeing is this really big paradigm shift where all companies are becoming technology companies and all companies are having this incredible demand. And where GA sort of enters into that space is to say, you don't have to have a degree in computer science to be able to get skilled up and access those kinds of jobs. You don't even have to have a 4-year degree. And I think that one of the things that we're really excited and optimistic about is the fact that skills and demand are changing so quickly presents a lot of risk for a lot of folks, but also presents a lot of opportunity. And I think that's something that we're really excited and optimistic about, and where I think also our partnerships with employers, but also community colleges and nonprofits to create pathways for underserved and overlooked talent into the tech sector, create some bright spots that I think we're really optimistic about.
So Charlotte, where does this harmonize with what you were saying about new collar jobs?
Yeah, for sure. Well, just to echo what's been said already by Tom, is that IBM at any time has thousands of open positions, right? And we know that the U.S. has hundreds of thousands of open tech positions specifically. And I think, and don't quote me, but I'm pretty sure something like 1/10 of all people who graduate college graduate with any kind of computer science degree. So there's this huge skills gap, right? And that is really why PTech was founded, and also a lot of the reasons why the New Collar Job Initiative was started. And this idea of new collar jobs isn't new to IBM necessarily, no pun intended. It was, an idea that IBM has had for a long time, but was only coined in November of 2016. And the idea there is not that we're creating different jobs or new jobs for people who have different skills or only tech skills, but it's actually just that we're kind of opening the aperture of what you need to be, a good employee at IBM in terms of foundational resume skills. Do you really need a 4-year degree? Or is it that you have a 2-year degree and you did GA and, or another coding boot camp and you've maybe worked a little bit with a startup and now you have really honed these skills and you're actually a really great candidate for this job. So it's really not reimagining the job as much as it's reimagining the hiring process for that job and what the foundational skills are for those jobs, because just not enough people are graduating with those degrees for us to fill these jobs, and we know that there are people out there who can.
So are you ready to weigh in yet, Aiha, and tell us about how this is affecting us at this point in time as far as watching jobs go out of existence?
Sure. So I guess what Data and Society has been doing for a while is actually looking at jobs that have been automated, that have been, replaced by machines. And there are 2 findings that we found. One is that actually oftentimes the human is still there. They're just not nearly as visible because we see this machine more. But so a lot of jobs that many would think are gone, like self-checkout has replaced cashiers, there's still cashiers there, still doing a lot of that work and still requiring a lot of skills. So that can be extended to the example of pilots. We all think everything's on autopilot. That's not true. There is a pilot that's there. Drone operators. So the reality is that a lot of automation actually has not led to complete loss of jobs. But I want to talk a little bit more forward thinking. I think it was this week the Bureau of Labor Statistics released their forecast about what kind of jobs were going to grow the quickest over the next several decades. And they said the biggest growths would be in energy, math, and medicine. So in energy, what we're seeing people already do is workers in construction and trade starting to really learn how to do new skills for everything from wind power to solar power, but also construction for climate change. which is a very interesting situation. It's not happening everywhere, but it is a new consideration that people are realizing that, I think there was another report that said New York is going to start seeing more and more big storms. And so cities are starting to recognize that there are new infrastructures that need to be created. The other big field that I want to talk about is medicine. Since we already talked about math, programming, not everybody needs to have a degree in programming to have a job in the future. And the big sector in medicine is actually within personal and in-home care. There was some report from the Washington Post that had an astonishing statistic about 10,000 baby boomers retiring a day. I don't know if that's true, but but it is very high, and a lot of baby boomers maybe immediately don't need in-home care, and many would prefer not to have to go into hospitals. And so these are jobs that are going to be in high demand, that are already in high demand. And where technology interfaces with these jobs, the technology is creating it easier for workers to care for patients and elderly. Machines that can lift people, but also monitoring systems that are more portable and not necessarily attached to the hospital, which allow for better care within the home. So technology is really what's happening, working alongside a lot of industries. So that's what I would say is, the future of jobs, as well as technology is not necessarily going to replace workers, at least not immediately, but it will be working alongside workers.
So let me step back a little bit. The nature of jobs are changing, but it also seems that the nature of learning and training and education needs to change. So could each of you touch upon that in terms of how we need to think outside of our normal K-12 education, and then thinking about that from there you then go and get, say, a 2-year or 4-year degree? How does that now start to change shape?
I'll start, sure. So yeah, my background is in education, so this is what I should be talking about. But P-TECH is a really innovative model. It's a 9 through 14 model. It was started in 2011 by IBM as an industry partner, the Department of Education in New York, and then CUNY City Tech. And the idea is that it's a 6-year high school. It's public, unscreened high school in Crown Heights, where students get their high school degree at the same time as getting a college degree. So they're getting a free associate's degree in a STEM field. In our school, it's either a computer information system, so computer science, or it's electromechanical engineering. And it's not a linear pathway, so you're not doing just high school and then college, as school has formerly been. But in this situation, it's actually, you can take college classes as soon as you kind of pass those regents and get some other core skills that we make necessary before you can. But like entry could be 10th grade. By 10th grade, you could be taking college courses with college students in a STEM field. And so what that's led to in the 6 years, we're in our 7th year now, and I manage the founding school, is that we've hired 11 kids full-time out of this program into IBM without having to go get more college or having any debt. They're all making upwards of $50,000, like for being like 18-year-olds. Yeah, it's really amazing. I mean, and believe me, they work their butts off. They're doing college and high school at the same time, but they're really gritty and they really want it. I think that the idea of industry being a part of schools in terms of innovation and how that's, what we're trying to do to reimagine this space is hugely important. I think that you can skill a student up and you can educate them, but if they don't have those networks, if they don't have mentors, if they only are confined to the communities in which they grew up in that are very homogeneous often, like it's really, really hard to break out of that. So I think that just the industry factor alone, not to mention also free college and everything, but I think industries need to step up and get more involved in schools.
Yeah, I can speak to this as well. I mean, I think GA's
and we work with GA,
Yes.
and we love them, so that's a good thing too.
Yeah, we had we have a part-time online program that people can take at their own time, and a whole group of P-TECH students this summer, while they were doing their apprenticeships, were able to keep their skills sharp by doing these part-time programs. at no cost from GA, which was cool. I think what we are seeing is sort of two things. I would say a lot of it's about the career exposure, right? Like if you don't know what it is, then you don't know that you necessarily want to pursue it. And I think that that's where creating sort of a continuum of opportunities at every single level for people to sort of touch and feel tech, even if it doesn't become the thing that they do with their life. But having that awareness is really, really meaningful. And it's one of the reasons why, I am so bullish on groups like Girls Who Code and Black Girls Code and all these other organizations that are sort of creating spaces for young people to sort of touch and feel it in a way that makes it feel authentic and real. And even if they don't go into STEM, a STEM field as their college major or the thing that they do for their job, having that information is really, really powerful. I think tied to that is something that we see, which is around this idea of hybrid jobs and what I was sort of just alluding to. Every job has some sort of tech component, right? And so there's such a need for sort of at least some level of digital literacy that's going to only increase moving forward, that has to happen at every stage of the educational curriculum. I also think that the notion that the only pathway into a high wage, high potential job is by completing K-12 and going straight into a 2 or 4 year program is something that's also changing. And I think that's where GA has really been a disruptor. This notion that you come to GA for 3 months, it's all day, it's every day, it's really, really intense. But we've had some people who have come to us after being Wall Street investment bankers. We've come to people who have only, who are managing a Nike store, right, and didn't go to college. And I think it really is more about how do you create these different opportunities so that wherever people are starting from and wherever they want to go, they can take advantage of those opportunities. And there was a cool article that came out this week in Fast Company about one of the programs that we're doing with a really terrific group called Perscolas up in the Bronx. I profiled a student who, he was a janitor at his old high school. He was an amateur Golden Gloves boxer, hadn't gone to college, went through GA's program to become a web developer, is now making $70,000 a year at a startup here in New York City. And he's one of over 500 students who have taken GA's programs at no cost and who are, sort of seen by a lot of industry as non-traditional talent, but in my mind are simply underserved and overlooked. And I think that the more that we can sort of create pathways for folks where, no matter where they are in their sort of own kind of professional and educational journey, they can tap into opportunities that can get them to that next level, whatever it looks like, is going to, I think, fundamentally change the way that we think about education and career pathways.
So we hear that the skills profile really requires tech skills, but what about soft skills or communication skills or more affective skills? What's the role that they play now as we, are in this, more tech-driven environment, but also is more collaborative? How's all that?
So I'm going to answer this in a little kind of a weird way. So a couple of years ago, there was a lot of effort to get a lot of people into nursing because this was a industry in which there was a lot of growth, there's a lot of need. This is part of the reason why the U.S. immigration system brings a lot of nurses from other countries because there aren't sufficient number here. And there was a real effort to get men into nursing. And it wasn't quite that successful because people failed to recognize that there was an identity that men had, and there was this perception that nursing was women's work. And so, and because of that, it really was like this unrecognized barrier, but one that also shouldn't really exist. There is no such thing as women's work, and there's no such thing as men's work. But I think being able to really disentangle that and also value these jobs that should be paid well is going to be part of the pathway to getting there. In terms of soft skills, there's plenty of soft skills. It's a lot of customer service. It's a lot of patience. It's a lot of being able to really listen and to be intuitive to someone's needs. So, and men are capable of that too, I believe. So I think really there is this like cultural shift that might have to happen, especially if more jobs are moving away from extraction, coal mining, to technology, which if anyone saw that movie, now I'm blanking on it, women were the computers originally.
Hidden Figures.
Hidden Figures, exactly. And now, why is it women are so few in programming?
Just to follow up on that, so our school, as I mentioned, is an unscreened public high school called PTech. As you could imagine, we have many more male students than we do female students in our school. Our ratio is, what is it, Rashid, 74% boys? Yeah, 74% boys. And then the nursing school below us is about 74% girls. And we're all in the same building. And that's just completely societal, right? Like that is a cultural outcome. So that's something that we're constantly trying to think about as well. And then in addition to that, just the soft skills question, it's a huge component in what makes people successful at work. If you have the skills, but you can't, send an email correctly, or you're not showing up to work on time, or, you don't know how to like look engaged and like you're listening, or I don't know, all sorts of like, right, things that really matter in the office place, then you're not gonna be successful. But how can people be successful at those skills who never get the opportunity to practice those skills, right? So, we have paid internships for our juniors at IBM. That's a competitive program, but more than half the grade level get to do like 6 to 7 week internships at IBM at all the offices in Manhattan. And we noticed that just doing that for them, just the experience of 7 weeks of being in an office with professionals every day makes such an enormous change in terms of their soft skill development. It's really hard to teach that in school, even in college, right? It's really hard to teach those sorts of skills if you're not in the environment. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity for innovation there, but I think right now the best solution we have is like actual experience.
Yeah, and I think this is something that we need to sort of look at more broadly as like a society. I think it's interesting to me because I think a lot of this conversation around sort of soft skills often focuses on people who have been sort of like left, been excluded from having a lot of opportunity. But I would say from my own experience at General Assembly, we have to do a lot of work with everybody, right? And even folks who have had college degrees and a lot of opportunities still don't have those sort of employability skills or the ability to effectively navigate the workplace or have empathy or to sort of diffuse situations. So I think that's something that our entire education system needs to look at. I also think it's something that can be taught, and I think that we see that in our own sort of career coaching program, but I look at some of the nonprofits we work with who do incredible work, whether it's PTech or Year Up or Perscolas, who, just embedded into the curriculum. And I think it's something that is an important part of the overall conversation, but I think is something that, in the United States, we need to take a long, hard look at in terms of preparing people for the actual workforce, regardless of what that actually looks like.
So I'm going to ask everyone to offer up their final insight, and then we're going to go into Q&A so we can have an interactive discussion to round out this, I think, excellent panel. Let's give these folks a hand. So let's start at the far end of the table.
I think my final insight in thinking about these jobs that are growing in energy, math, and medicine, some of them, especially jobs in care, already exist now. And they're actually not very great jobs. So I think, we have to do a better job of making sure that they become good jobs if this is actually where we're headed for us to be sustainable. And technology can do some of that, but I think, as others mentioned, it is a societal shift that we have to make to prepare for the future of jobs.
IBM's stance on the jobs of the future situation around this doomsday idea of robots taking over the world is that AI and the cloud and cybersecurity and all these things will need people and probably create more jobs for people. And that's where we stand with it. But I think from the workforce development side, the lens that I look through, I would just ask that people find, if you're in a business, to find a school within your community to try to partner with. And if you're in a school, try to find a business in your community to partner with. And even starting off with like job shadowing or site visits or something small will make a really big, make a really big impact in kids' lives. And just that kind of exposure would be really great. So that's my piece.
Yeah, I agree with all of those points. And one thing that I think about a lot is that one thing that's sort of related to all of this, but kind of not part of the core of the discussion is, when we think about when how people get skills for jobs and when, there's sort of a bigger question about who pays, right? And I think that one thing that we're sort of seeing more and more is, you look at the K-12 system, you look at the cost of college, you look at the sort of burden of college debt, you look at the sort of relevance of, four-year degrees to the current marketplace, but also the huge demand that exists, and, the pieces just don't match up. And so I think that there's also some sort of like broader policy questions that, I don't think this administration is going to tackle, but, around sort of like how we think about like, who's responsible for, preparing people for the workforce, and at what point, and who bears that burden, right? And I think that the way that the current system is set up, it really is more likely to sort of deepen the gaps between the haves and the have-nots, and the sense that that even a smaller and smaller and smaller subset will be able to access those jobs in the future. And that's where I think that like you have innovative programs like the PTech program, but also sort of different public-private partnerships that can drive that. But that's not going to be sustainable and scalable if there isn't a sort of a fundamentally different way that we look at, who actually invests in talent and when and how we get people into the jobs of the future.
I think that's a great jumping off point for us to start to take questions. So,
Hello, thank you. My question is actually a two-part question. At the World Economical Forum in Dubai this year, you had a bunch of industry leaders talking about the situation of automation taking away from jobs, and then there was actually an interjection from Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg discussing the idea of having a global wage to compensate for a workforce of automation beside of human workforce. How do you feel about that?
You mean like a universal basic income?
Yes, exactly.
I support it.
Okay.
Yeah, but like, no, I think it's a really good point in terms of just sort of, again, this sort of ties into sort of like, how do we sort of think about resource allocation in the sort of like the future economy? And I think, I love the concept of it. I think the reality of it is pretty hard to sort of think through just from like a policy and operational perspective. But I do think it sort of then speaks again to those broader issues about sort of how do we sort of create more equity so that there's more opportunity for economic mobility, regardless of where you're starting from. And I think that while UBI may be something that isn't sort of like, is more sort of like the aspirational vision of that, I think there's sort of practical ways that we can get closer to that vision, even if that's not the way that we get there.
anyone else would like to weigh in, or?
Everything he said. I think that's a very good analysis of exactly what is being proposed is some type of creation of equity, given that technology can in some cases create a lot of inequity. But I'm not sure that UBI is the way to go, particularly in this country where universal basic income is a challenge right now.
Well, one of the suggestions was made to actually a corporation that had all these automation was to actually tax the robots to be automized. It was just
Bill Gates proposed that.
Yeah. Yes. He wasn't the first.
Just to that point, there's a community in Canada that's experimenting with that, the universal income. And they actually have found that people, their education levels have improved, their health levels have improved, and there's more investment by families in community now because they feel more secure. So it's almost common sense. And I know the Swiss are actually toying with that as well nationally. But that's not my question. But it's a great question to ask. But Tom, you said something that I thought was kind of profound, which is that you alluded to the current educational system, and if I was hearing you properly, it sounded like you thought that what we have now is kind of a racket, where a 4-year education costing someone $250,000 and trying to train he or she for a career that's going to include at least 6 jobs over 30 years might not be the way to go. And then you said, who should be responsible for training our workforces? And so my question is, if you were the person making the policy and you could actually get rid of the educational system racket, which is effectively what it's become, how would you go about doing that? And that's a question for everybody across the board.
That's a big question. Yeah, I don't know that I would say that it's a racket. I mean, I think that I value my own 4-year degree. It was a transformative experience. What I do think, though, is that the way that the current system is structured is like, I get a benefit from the government through loans where I don't have good information about what level of, when I'm making choices as a consumer, I don't know like where the actual job demand is, right? And I don't know the correlation between the degree program that I'm going to and that job demand, right? Like I have imperfect information. And employers have no incentive, colleges don't have any incentive, or four-year institutions have any incentive to sort of align with what the workforce needs, right? So, because they're able to sort of collect that benefit, and I'm not saying that like, colleges are sort of just like greedy and trying to take people's money, but there aren't a set of incentive systems in place that are able to sort of make that connection to the workforce. And the workforce doesn't have a really good signaling system to say to training providers or to workers, like here's what's needed and why and how you get it. And I think one thing the General Assembly has done effectively, and other organizations in the space, is to say, let's build backwards to what the levels of demand are and create really short form training that gets people ready for those jobs, right? With the understanding that things are always going to be changing, right? So I think it's less about getting rid of a racket and more just sort of saying, how can employers be on the hook more to signaling what they want? How can training providers, whether that's colleges and universities or community colleges, or last mile training providers like us, be incentivized to get people ready for those types of careers, recognizing that college isn't just about sort of getting ready for the job labor market, right? But that's a core part of it. And getting better information to consumers so that people have really informed choices about, not only what's in demand today and tomorrow, but also 3, 5, 10 years from now.
There's one here, one here.
Yeah, hello. This question is actually for Tom. Very big fan of GA, by the way. My name is Jeff Champon. I run a talent accelerator in Ghana to help unemployed graduates get jobs in the formal sector. And if you look at places like Ghana, Nigeria, the youth unemployment rate is approaching about 50%. I'm wondering what kind of like policies or what kind of processes does GA have in place to work with these kind of countries? And if so, what are the stipulations of these partnerships per se?
Yeah, it's something we have not figured out. And I think Andela is an organization that I would point to that's doing really incredible work in a number of different African countries. And there are a lot of really phenomenal startups that have sort of sprung up, throughout, other parts of the world that I think that, we are, more than anything, it's about the challenge in terms of moving into a new market for a business like GA's is, do we know that the market demand is there for the careers? Do we know that there's demand from employers? And do we know that there's sufficient like customer demand essentially to, and this goes back to the who pays question, right? Sort of be able to sort of access that training and get those jobs, right? And I think that we haven't quite figured out how to sort of like crack that code in a lot of, we're mostly in the United States, Australia, Canada, and the UK. So sort of outside of those markets, how to sort of move into these sort of different labor markets where you have different sort of sets of systems and incentives in place. What I will say that we have done is to be able to license our curriculum at no cost to organizations that are working in the sector. So we have work with a group called Code to Inspire, which is training girls in Western Afghanistan how to code. They have the space, they have the instructors, they have the students, they understand their community, and we can sort of give them some content so that they have a really rich and robust set of resources to sort of apply those. And so, but I think that this is something where, I'd point to organizations like Andela who are doing really remarkable work and have been able to sort of, in a very sort of organic way, engage within local communities and local markets to sort of understand how to meet that, meet those gaps. And I think that GA is, hopefully just one of many actors out there who can be sort of part of that solution globally.
Hello.
We have time for one more question, unfortunately, and then we'll need to wrap up, please.
That's perfect. This question is for Tom and Charlotte. My name is Henry Kwame Owusu. I heard about this event through my organization, my company, Roku. Actually, we're hiring, so please, if anybody wants to reach out to me, I'll be outside. I think my question is more in terms of what this gentleman said right here about, college education, about it being about $250,000 for 4 years and whatnot. But living in Harlem and, seeing and growing up in New York City, I think that, even $50 or maybe $16,000 for a certain education is a bit too expensive for people in and around my community. So my question to you, Tom, is, what is considered affordable to go to a school like General Assembly? What opportunities is your organization providing for people that probably can't afford to spend this type of money or get into that type of debt? And to you, Charlotte, your organization PTech seems very interesting. And one of the things I remember you said was that in terms of internships, you were able to get like 11 students into an internship program. But my question is, are you partnering with other technology companies to probably provide those other students that couldn't get that opportunity to be involved in that internship with IBM? Because I'm sure that there's other companies that don't want to take the talent that you're actually housing, but want to give these students, the other students that didn't get that opportunity and experience to really get involved in technology. And that's it. Thank you.
It's a great question, and thank you for asking it. So, over the past 2 years, we've given out $7 million in scholarships to over 500 young adults to take our programs, which are 3 months long at no cost to them. And what I think one of the things that we've really seen is that there are some different loan providers out there for programs like ours, but if you have barriers to capital or credit, like taking out a loan is just not feasible. And so, while scholarships have been able to help us prove out that no matter that people who are highly motivated, even if they haven't had a lot of educational and professional opportunities, can be really successful in a program like GA's and get really amazing jobs. And I'd point to Anthony, who I was referring to earlier, went from being a janitor to a developer in a very short period of time. Now we're at a point where we're saying, okay, how do we make this more sustainable? And that's where we're starting to sort of test what pay for success models or income share agreements that can help people, regardless of their access to capital or credit, take our programs at no cost to them. If they get a job, when they get a job, they'll pay a certain percentage of their income over time. We're testing it in Washington, D.C. with a really great nonprofit called Opportunity at Work to sort of help folks who are underserved and overlooked to sort of get into the tech sector in a way that the risk is on us, right? Like if you don't get a job, we don't get paid, right? But we believe that we're going to take a bet on your talent, and then when that pays off and you're making 70, 80 plus $1,000 a year as a developer, you'll pay back a small portion of that. And I think there are a lot of organizations really looking at this, and I think that's where you can start to think about more sustainable pathways to sort of create access to programs like ours for folks who can't afford them.
So just to clarify, we actually had from my school only, and I'm an IBMer, so even though the school is called PTech, I'm the IBM liaison there, so I'm not directly associated. But we've actually had this summer about 50 kids interning full-time at IBM just from my school. There's over 80 PTech schools now across the world, including one opening in Morocco in November. Many of which are not IBM schools. There's like a Cisco school, a GE school, all sorts of other big STEM tech companies that have taken our open source model and ultimately kind of like started their own with the same pillars. But we've hired 11 kids full-time at IBM, so ages 18, 19, and 20, all working. And the reason they all come from my school is the oldest school with graduates. So we have some other kids graduating from some other schools this year, so I'm sure that number will continue to increase. We actually have 3 kids at least, if not more, from our school who are also in final interview stages now. Since it's a 6-year program and we're only in year 7, we've just completed our first ever cohort from grade 9 through grade 14. So still early days, but I think that in terms of us collaborating with other partners and other industry partners, which gets to kind of the second part of your question, we have had students, intern at the MTA. We've had students at Interfaith Medical Center. We have students, trying and we're knocking down doors to get other opportunities for them too, even during the school year, right? Like our students who are taking only college courses now and have a lot of time, like they should be getting more workforce development maybe than we can even offer. So that's totally something we talk about. But to be really honest, like IBM did this very unprecedented thing where they said, we're going to take juniors in high school and we're going to bring them in as, as IBMers that are like 16 years old, and we're going to pay them $14 an hour, and we're going to have them work for us 4 days a week. And like, I've tried to knock down other tech companies' doors and say, do what we're doing, like offer our kids or any kids, this kind of an opportunity. And they're like, what, 16-year-olds? Like, can they even do the work? And it's a lot of naysayers out there. So I'd be happy to collaborate with any other companies that are willing to do this kind of a thing, because I do think that we need more opportunities, right? Like IBM is one company, and we have in the U.S. like 6 schools, and all those schools are being provided with internships. So other companies should get on board.
Charlotte, isn't there a P-Tech grad here in your property?
Chikozy, he's not here any longer, but yes, he was here today. Yeah, Chikozy Okori. We hired someone into my division who works for me now, which is great because I work with the school, and to have someone who is an insider working with me full time is really wonderful.
So we have to wrap up. Let's give our panelists a round of applause. I think it was very informative, and they can speak to people offline if you have further questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.